This is Module 9. We're going to talk about how to use MATLAB to control or communicate with Arduino board. So before we start, let me close this one. Before we start, we need to install the firmware to our Arduino board. To do that, you will need to open the Arduino programming tool to download the firmware. So the first thing we need to do is to open the firmware. So let's go to the, I put that in the directory called lab9. So I'm going to open the firmware over here. The name is firmware.pde. You will need to use this one, and it must be this one. You cannot just download any PDE file, or you assume it's default. It's not default, because by default there is no program in your Arduino board. So you definitely need to install the firmware to your Arduino before it can be used to communicate with MATLAB. So once this one is done, you can just compile and upload the code to your system. But before we do that, keep in mind you will need to select the correct Arduino board. In this case, we are using Arduino or generic Arduino Uno board. And the second thing is, let's click this one. And once it's done, we also need to specify which port we're going to use. So in this case, it's COM3. So once you set the correct parameters for the development tool, you can just upload and run the program. So yeah, here we go. Once this one is done, your board is ready to communicate with your MATLAB console. So let's open MATLAB. MATLAB is over here. So we're going to run MATLAB 2017. Okay, here we go. And before we start to do everything, the first thing we need to do is to select the correct directory where all the files are stored. You see all those files are stored over here. I'm still going to show you how to change your directory. So if you need to change your directory to the to where you store all those functions, you just click this one, browse for folder. Click this one, and there is another window going to pop up, and you can just select course, control area, robotics, and I put it in lab9. So just double click this one, select folder, and you're going to see there are 8 functions over here. All the functions are necessary. Be sure you put everything all together. Do not store those functions in different directories, because your MATLAB might not be able to recognize where those files are stored. So put them together and select your default directory to this one. Then everything should be okay and good to go. Now, before we can do anything, we need to initialize our Arduino board. And we know that in this case, the COM port is COM3. So we're going to do that. And on the other side over here, you see there are functions over here. Typically, there are 5 functions we use all the time. The first one is Initialize Arduino. And we also have digital in, digital out. We have analog input, analog output. So those are the functions we need to use all the time. All the others are just supporting program files. Do not change them. Just leave them as they are. Unless you know how to modify those, do not change anything. So since we have everything installed, the first thing we need to do is to initialize the board. But how can we do that? Let's type help and initialize Arduino. So when you click enter, you're going to see there is a short description over here explain how this function is working. Over here you need to name that one as a variable. Then you need to tell this command which COM port you're going to be using. And this is coincidence. The example over here shows COM3, and we are physically using COM3. If you are not using COM3, that's fine, because your COM3 might be occupied by other device. So as long as you can figure out which port you're going to be using, using property manager, then you'll be fine. So just like what we say, we need to have a variable name, and we type init Arduino, and we know it's COM3 in this case. Oops. So when you click enter, it will start to connecting to the board, and once it's done, you're going to see all the pins and the status are listed over here. You might feel weird because pin 14 to pin 19 are unassigned. Why is that? Because we are using Uno. There are only 14 digital input-output pins in the system. Anything greater than pin 13 belongs to some other port. For instance, Mega has 20 digital in, digital out pins, so this is going to be designed for them. But it doesn't mean we cannot use those commands. We can just use that as good as other board. The only thing you need to be careful is how many pins are available on a Uno card, because they can be a major bottleneck when you try to develop your program. So let's start. Now we have we know that MATLAB has connected to the Arduino. If we want to do digital output and you don't know what to do, just type, the first D should be capital, digital out. Then it will show up how digital out can be used. There are still a few things you need to know. You need to know what is your object name that has been initialized when you start the Arduino programming. Second thing is, you would need to tell me which pin you need the Arduino to do the I/O job. And once you specify that, you also need to know whether it's going to be 0 or 1. When it is 0, you turn it off. If it's 1, you turn it on. If you want to do analog input, you can just type help analog in, then it's going to do the same thing. And over here it's going to be a little bit different, because the analog input over here is going to return a value to you, which is the voltage. So when we try to use this one, you also need to specify the object name of your Arduino. The second one is which port you're going to read your analog input. On an Uno board, there are 6 channels from 0 to 6. So you will need to specify those numbers precisely. So let's do that. So let's say I have voltage I want to read equals to analog in, and I just name the Arduino board as A. So put A over here, and I want to read pin 0. Click, you're going to find out it returns 2.7 to you. The unit of the answer is going to be voltage, but you might wonder, I didn't connect anything to my pin 0, why I got 2.7 volt? That is because your pin is floating. Floating means that it does not connect it to anywhere. It can be ground, it can be 5 volt, it can be anything. But if you just leave it floating around, then it's going to be random data, because all the natural environment must have some disturbance. So it's just telling you the disturbance at this moment is 2.7 volt. It can be due to the floating. So if we put this pin to ground, what happened? It becomes 0, which means if we connecting the floating pins to the correct ground or to 5V, then we should be able to regulate the readings to be more precisely. Now, if I change my connection from ground, which is 0, to 5V, and we do the same thing again, you're going to see it's going to be 4.9951 volts. If we change the input voltage into 3.3 volts and read that again, it's 3.5. It's a little bit offset, but as long as they are close enough, that's fine. So this short video tells you how to upload the firmware to your Arduino Uno board, and once it's done, how to initialize your MATLAB so your MATLAB can be communicating with the board. You just download the firmware. You only need to download the firmware for once. As long as you didn't upload any new code to the board, to the Uno board, it can be used as the ADDA card. So that's a lecture for this short, for this part introducing how to use MATLAB to communicate with Arduino board.